Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. I am here today with the famous Fabian Wosar. He's the Chief Technology Officer for Emsisoft. Welcome, Fabian.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Well, it's a pleasure. I have heard many things about you for a long time, so I appreciate this opportunity to, have this fireside chat with you and talk about all things ransomware. So I guess we could start with how did you first get started in IT? What's your IT technical beginning?
It's actually sort of a long story. So I originally grew up in the GDR, which most of you probably better know as East Germany, right?
Okay.
And my dad used to be in poultry trading. But during the unification of Germany, he lost his job like many others did, because let's be honest, a lot of these jobs, they were made up. Because in the GDR, you actually had a right to have a job. That means if you wanted to work, then they would provide a job for you. And in many cases, they would just make up some sort of job, right? Not now, kitty. There we go. So he lost his job. And what they did with these new unemployed people is they created educational programs for them. And essentially, these programs were designed to teach these now redundant workers new skills to allow them to seek out new jobs.
Okay.
And my dad participated in like one of these programs, and there he got to work with computers. And when I visited him during one of his classes, back when I was like 6 or so, I got to interact with a computer for the very first time.
Oh.
And I was completely fascinated by computers, and I've ever since, honestly. So the next 3 to 4 years, I spent saving up all my money that I earned from doing just menial tasks for my neighbors, collecting bottles and like scrap metal and bringing it to the local recycle center where I could trade it in for some cash, right?
Sure.
And when I was like 11 or so, 10, 11, I had enough money to actually buy my first computer. And it quite literally took me 1 or 2 weeks until I had my first virus infection. Because back then, I mean, you know how school kids are, right? In the 90s,
Sure.
you traded floppy disks with your friend on the schoolyard, like exchanged the newest games, and it didn't take long for me to get a virus infection. And that is how I became aware of what a computer virus is. And those fascinated me even more than computers did. So yeah, ever since then, I've been quite fascinated by malware in general. So my first thing was that I taught myself programming in assembly, mostly because I wanted to look how these computer viruses worked. And most computer viruses back then were written in assembly language.
Okay.
I later also taught myself C and Pascal. I created like a couple of small virus scanners, like small tools that were able to detect like certain virus strains and clean infected files, stuff like that, really. I then sort of dropped out of high school without a degree, which is somewhat unfortunate, but yeah, it's like one of the regrets in life that I never got a proper high school diploma, so to say, right? But I worked for like a couple of IT businesses, and eventually I ended up at Mgsoft.
Okay. And Mgsoft is a very good company. We have been, selling and supporting Mgsoft ourselves and my IT business for a while. So we love the brand, and we love what you're doing over there at Mgsoft. It seems like when we first started selling it, we had a lot of problems with our break fix customers, and they would constantly call us with virus problems. But we as soon as we started deploying Mgsoft, then we quit having those calls. So Mgsoft was great in that aspect, especially if you're headed towards an MSP and you want to keep your client safe and secure. So we really like the company. So how long have you been working for Mgsoft then? You said you were right out of high school?
Yeah, I think I'm like really bad when it comes to timelines, to be honest. I
Okay.
think I worked for Mgsoft for about like 15 years. So
Oh,
I
wow.
started like shortly after Mgsoft was founded. So yeah,
Okay.
about 15 years, give or
Have
take
you
a year or two.
have you always been the chief technology officer there, or did you start at a
No,
lower role?
no, no. I did and continue to do all sorts of stuff at Mgsoft. I started out as pretty much a normal developer.
Okay.
Um, so yeah.
Well, I also understand that you used to own your own antivirus company as well, as prior to coming to Mgsoft.
No, no, I didn't.
Okay. I'm not sure where I read that then. Well, getting down to the juicy nuts and bolts of this conversation, how did you get to be known worldwide as the ransomware killer?
I guess by killing lots of ransomware.
So, how much ransomware have you killed?
So I probably dissected way over 1,000 different ransomware families,
Okay.
and we produce decryption tools for probably like 200 different ransomware families out
Oh,
there.
wow.
Generally, to be honest, I don't really like titles or like mentions and like monikers like ransomware slayer and ransomware
Sure.
killer, or when people call me the best in when it comes to the topic of ransomware. And to be quite honest with you, that has nothing to do with like humbleness. It has all to do with anxiety, to be completely honest with you, since it
Sure.
kind of puts a lot of pressure on me whenever someone shows up. So I don't necessarily, I mean, I've come to embrace these titles over time, but especially in the beginning, they were more anxiety inducing than anything else.
That's understandable. So, when my wife tells me that I'm the greatest of all time, I get a little anxious too. So, I understand. I understand. So, I understand that you are so good at creating these, and but don't let my questions, make you anxious here. But
Oh
I
no, don't
understand
worry about it.
you are really, really good at cracking the code to this. The cyber criminals code for their ransomware. Um, you know do you still get death threats on a daily basis?
Certainly not on a daily basis.
Okay.
Ransomware groups have gotten like a lot more professional over the past couple of years. It's no longer just lone wolves sitting in their basement somewhere doing every single step that's part of a ransomware attack themselves, who then tend to just explode on Twitter or sending like hateful messages towards you if you break their ransomware family. It has gotten a lot more professional and a lot more business-like, right? That being said, I still don't feel comfortable having my picture out there or attending like events in person.
Sure.
And that is to one part, of course, due to my overall anxiety issues, but the other part is still that I still don't necessarily feel safe to do so. Because even though it has gotten a lot less, it never has like ceased entirely.
Understood. So, that's got to be that's got to be a tough position to be in. Where you feel like I can't really go out into the outside world because I'm worried about I'm worried about the cyber criminals putting a hit out on me or something because I'm literally destroying their business. So,
It has gotten a lot better ever since I moved to the UK, mostly because within the UK, it's actually relatively easy to live anonymously compared to Germany. In
okay.
Germany, you have a central register where every single person needs to register where they are living and some other details, right? And what most people may not be aware is that if you go to a local municipality, you can simply request the data record and request the address of people,
Okay.
as long as you can give them enough information so that your record is the only one that shows up
Hmm.
during a search. So if you have like an unusual name, like mine, for example, or in many cases, if you have the birth date of the person you're looking for, then there's a pretty good chance that you will be the only one left in the search result. And for only like €5, which is the equivalent of like $6, right? They will hand out your address, no questions asked, pretty much.
Hmm.
So that certainly is an issue when your daily job consists of pretty much screwing over a whole bunch of cyber criminals every single day. So yeah, in Germany, it was a lot more anxiety inducing. Here, though, since there's no central register or anything like that, I can live pretty anonymously. And it never gotten to the point where I was scared to actually go out of my house, for example. It was more the fact that I think it's called like doorbell anxiety. Whenever the doorbell rings, right, you need to make extra sure that who's outside, and you get like this increased heart rate and stuff like that. It was more like that. But as I mentioned before, it's a lot better now in the UK.
That's excellent. So you talk about the ransomware gangs becoming more professional. Can you elaborate on what you've seen and how you've seen their level of professionalism over the last 2 or 3 years kind of improve?
So what happened with ransomware is essentially that groups or certain actors within groups, they started to specialize.
Okay.
So nowadays, a typical ransomware attack, you're not dealing with like one threat actor who does everything, who wrote the ransomware, who gained initial access to your network, who then infiltrated your network, spread laterally, who then goes on and does the actual negotiation, and who then later has to launder the money. Nowadays, all these single steps, they are specialized. There are specialized teams for all of them. You have people who specialize in the customer support and the negotiation. You have teams who specialize in the initial access to the network. You have people who specialized in pen testing and lateral movement, kind of how to expand your reach once you are in the network to all the other systems, to all the other servers, right? Stuff like that. Nowadays, a typical ransomware attack, there are often like 5, sometimes even 10 different parties involved. And with that comes the necessity to just conduct yourself a lot more professional as well. You can no longer just be a loose gun, so to say, start insulting people and all this other sort of stuff that used to happen a lot in the past, because if you conduct yourself this way, the entire operation can't function properly. So oftentimes nowadays, a lot of these ransomware groups, they have like rule sets, like a code of honor, so to say, which targets are you allowed to hit, which aren't you allowed to hit, right? What can you do, what can't you do? This often is even reflected within the technical aspects of a ransomware. Take REvil, for example. REvil, there actually exists a special operator code that would allow the ransomware operators, meaning like those people who actually created the ransomware and maintain like the web panel where you negotiate or where you create new ransomware payload builds, really. They included a certain key that allows them to decrypt any files encrypted by any REvil payloads.
Oh, wow.
Meaning, even if there is an affiliate who went rogue and hit a target that they weren't supposed to hit, they can step in and decrypt those files, even if the affiliate isn't cooperative, for example. So nowadays, there are like a lot of checks and balances, even within these relatively loose groups, that make sure everyone is kept in line, which doesn't really allow for stuff like sending security researchers death threats, right?
Wow. So, you know, and one of the things too, I've seen several occasions where, you know, the victim would be, the company would get hit, and they would reach out to the ransomware people and negotiate. And, you know, if cyber criminals can have a heart, we've seen it because especially with like a nonprofit, for instance, they'll say, well, we're nonprofit, and the ransomware people will just, you know, give them the key for free. So do you see that often?
That actually happens on a regular basis, especially with certain ransomware groups. Egregors, or Egregor or Maze.
Okay.
They rebranded like a while ago, and nowadays they completely disappeared from the landscape. We had several occasions where it turned out that one of their affiliate had hit hospitals.
Mm.
And quite frankly, the moment we told them, hey, listen, you have hit a hospital here, they instantly handed over the keys and apologized. Then you have groups like
Wow.
Avedon just recently, right? They closed down their operation and they handed out all the keys. Because yeah, they know, I mean, we are closing down our operation, nobody can pay anyway, so the very least we can do is just release all the keys so that the couple of victims that still need the data, they can get it for free. And this has happened quite a lot of times. Like it happened with Tesla Crypt, for example. It happened for Dharma a couple of times. So it isn't without precedence, and it happens on a regular basis. So yeah, I think it's actually something that a lot of people kind of tend to forget, that a lot of these people who are doing these sorts of attacks, they didn't, I mean, they didn't one day decided, oh, I want to go into cybercrime, right? A lot of them are sort of forced into this position over time. And it's not that you would go from like law-abiding citizen to I'm going to ransom a hospital from like one day to another. I mean, just look at the story of Marcus Hutchins, for example, Malware Tech,
Okay.
who I think he did like a rather comprehensive interview on Wired in the Wired magazine. And you can probably look it up, or maybe you can even post the link after our talk into underneath the recording. There you can actually see how it's just like small steps, right? And you kind of slip further down the slippery slope into cybercrime rather quickly. And eventually you reach the point where you just go numb because your conscience can't really deal with what you're doing anymore, and you just go numb and you're just doing it.
Right.
And sometimes people sort of like the conscience kind of creeps up and they realize that what they are doing is bad. And that is when these sorts of key leaks happen, or when threat actors actually report themselves or provide information to law enforcement agencies that can be used to dismantle the entire group.
Well, and I would assume that probably one of the biggest challenges in any country, the U.S. Particular, would be that ransomware continues to exist. One, because the victims continue to pay when they have no choice, or they feel like they have no choice. And one of the biggest reasons, though, I feel like, is that we probably can't enforce U.S. law in other countries. So it makes it very difficult to prosecute a cyber criminal, even if they are found, even if they are picked up. It's probably very difficult. Would you agree with that?
I 100% agree with that. It's even difficult to just attribute a lot of these attacks to like one specific country in the first place. There is this, I mean, to be quite honest with you, in a lot of cases, the attribution is just based on, does it check for a Russian keyboard layout? And if it does, then, oh yeah, we will just say that this was a Russian threat actor, right? When in reality, I could put anything in there.
Sure.
So it's like attribution. And I mean, there are cases where the actual infrastructure is being dismantled and where the infrastructure is being traced and stuff like that. And in those cases, you can attribute attacks with a certain certainty, right? But especially when you are only looking at the ransomware payload, attribution is more like reading tea leaves than an actual science. So it's quite difficult, and it gets sort of fuzzy very quickly. And a lot of these attacks are wrongly attributed to certain threat actors or even certain countries, at least in my experience and in my opinion.
Well, it seems like, ransomware has really exploded over the past 5 years and really become, a new normal, so to speak. What is your first dealings with ransomware? When was your first?
Um, so ransomware, as most people understand it today, which is like the data encrypting kind of ransomware,
Mhm.
the first case I handled in that regard was about 10 years ago. And we got approached, or I got approached by Larry, like Lawrence Abrams from Bleeping Computer, to help with some users who kind of showed up in their forums with this new sort of ransomware
Okay.
that doesn't just lock the screen, because that is what ransomware used to be before 2000, yeah, around 2012, 2011. It was just like an always on top screen that asked you to pay like a couple of $100 in order to use your computer again. Now, this particular ransomware didn't just have like a lock screen, as we called them, it also encrypted data. And at first, one of my colleagues, Arif, helped Larry and helped those victims. But one day, Arif wasn't available. So I said, hey, listen, I can take a look. And so I did. And yeah, to be honest, I was hooked after that. And I continued handling ransomware ever since.
So would you attest that? Because I was going to ask you, other than monetary reasons, why are you so passionate about defeating cyber criminals? What is your why?
Honestly, the defeating cyber criminals thing, that is more like that's just an added bonus, really, and just a side effect. I really enjoy and love puzzles.
Okay.
And ransomware are just a huge puzzle to me. Like trying to figure out what are they doing, how can I break it? That is sort of the thing I love the most. Now, of course, at the very least, that was my motivation when we started out, right? Nowadays, there's also just the immense amount of positive feedback that we get from people that we manage to help, the stories that we get to hear, for example. Yeah, and just let's call it just the good karma that we are collecting, really.
Well, in my opinion, you're a hero to all these people that, their world, their world is getting shut down when that ransomware strikes. I mean, it's very interesting. So, how many ransomware incidents have you dealt with in your career?
To be honest, I never really counted them. Now, our decryption tools that we offer for free on our website,
Okay.
they helped about like 5.5 million victims, right?
Wow.
And this includes both home users as well as companies. Now, in the past 3 years or so, we also started offering specialized recovery help, particularly for enterprise customers, right?
Okay.
Companies who paid a ransom and they got back threat actor decryptor, for example, and the threat actor decryptor doesn't work. Maybe it's too slow. Maybe it's because it has certain requirements that doesn't match their, well, or it's difficult to deploy. Maybe it just crashes, right? Stuff like that. And of those cases, I was personally involved in about 2,000 over the past 3 years.
Wow.
So overall, like cases where I had contact to the actual victims, it's probably in the tens of thousands over the past 10 years.
So how difficult is it for you? How long does it take when you see a new strain or new variant of ransomware come out? How long does it take you to create one of those free tools for, say, on average? I know each one is different and would have different variables, but on average, what would you say is your time from start to finish to come up with a decryption tool? And how do you even do that? Where do you start?
So from the time we get the ransomware payload, which
Mhm.
is like the ransomware executable that actually encrypts the data on the victim systems. It takes about 30 minutes to an hour to figure out whether or not there are any cryptographic weaknesses that we can exploit. Then the creation of the actual decryption tool that takes advantage of these vulnerabilities we found, that on average takes about 4 hours. So from start to finish, it's about like 5 to 6 hours, I would say, from we getting our hands onto a new ransomware payload to, yeah, here you go, enjoy your free decryptor, right? Or enjoy this decryptor that gets your data back. How you're doing it, it's essentially, I think at this point, just a lot of experience. As I said before, or maybe I didn't say it before, I don't remember. I might have mentioned it during our private conversation earlier. I probably dissected like well over 1,000 different ransomware families at this point. So I know exactly what I need to look for. I know exactly what the common mistakes are. So for me, it's just, oh yeah, opening this payload in IDA or in x64 debug, for example, looking exactly what are they doing to those files? How do they generate the key material? What algorithms do they use? Do they do all of this in a way that is proper? Because a lot of ransomware tools, even though they use like secure algorithms and stuff, they kind of screw up they kind of screw up basics, or they don't follow best practices, which allow us to sort of attack the implementation. So
about like us trying to spot a phishing email, right? You can look at it and say, oh, the spelling is off.
Yeah, and that's like a clear sign. Oh yeah, that is definitely phishing, because, well, my real bank probably has like someone checking the spelling in there. Although I have to be quite honest with you, I have seen some very, very atrocious and real banking emails in my years. So that's not always something to go by, but it certainly is like something that should raise like a red flag and should get your spider senses like tingling, right? So
gotcha. Well, in your opinion, what is phishing? What's the most common attack vector that the cyber criminals or threat actors are using today to attack their victims? Is it phishing, or what are some common attack vectors you see?
Common attack vectors. Let me think. So for home users, it's certainly a software piracy. Stop in particular, Stop is really the only ransomware family that is left that is targeting home users, and they almost exclusively spread through infected setups for common and popular programs that a lot of people like to download for free and essentially pirate, right? For companies, it's usually, I would say it's a toss between a lack of credential hygiene, meaning weak passwords, or you still have accounts around that shouldn't even be there in the first place, test users, like Larry's account who left like 3 years ago, things like that, right? Then the lack of patches, and patches nowadays does not only mean patch your Windows endpoints and your Windows servers, but in particular also patch your VPN appliance, which for some reason a lot of people tend to forget. And yeah, also a lot of spear phishing campaigns. So where certain individuals within a company get specifically targeted. For example, one classic are CVs and job applications sent directly to the HR department that contain malware, because I mean, your HR department probably expects to get like a lot of applications, and they tend to open those, right? Because that's kind of their job. And yeah, that's like the sort of stuff that we are seeing mostly when it comes to ransomware and like the corporate and even public area.
So are most of today's ransomware attacks, would you consider those targeted attacks, or do you see just kind of a broad shooting, so to speak, and then, whoever's caught in the crossfire gets caught? Or do you see this more targeted nowadays?
Honestly, that kind of depends on both your definition of most and your definition of targeted.
Hmm.
So if by most you mean like purely based on numbers, then no, because Stop, as I mentioned before, is still targeting home users, and Stop causes more ransomware incidents than all the rest of the ransomware ecosystem combined, right? And
Wow.
just based on that, you can already tell, no, it's untargeted, right? However, and if you are thinking of targeted as like someone deciding that they want to hack Tesla, for example, and then they go and hack Tesla and ransom them, then if that is your definition of targeted, then no, that's not really the case either. I mean, it happens,
That makes
not with
sense.
Tesla, but in general. But ransomware still is more like a crime of opportunity. Now, a lot of people, when they talk about targeted attacks, what they actually mean are human operated attacks, where an actual human gets into your network, scans your network, tries to figure out things, which systems are particularly juicy, which systems do we need to hit first to like maximize the impact of our ransomware attack, even if while we are launching it, we get found out, for example, and someone stops the encryption process, right? Then if that is your definition of targeted, we call it human operated, then yes, the majority of ransomware breaches, especially when it comes to especially when it comes to companies and the overall enterprise level, those are all targeted in that sense.
Well, we definitely saw in the MSP world the targeted attack with the Kaseya supply chain attack recently. That's scary. Do you see a lot more of that in the future with ransomware? A lot more of those kind of attacks, or how do you see the landscape changing in the next 5 to 10 years with ransomware in regards? Do you see it going away or something new?
I don't see the ransomware landscape in the next 5 to 10 years to be fundamentally different than what we are currently seeing, right? I don't see like this huge fundamental shift from like going from screen lockers to file encryption. I don't see that within the next 5 to 10 years. What people still have to keep in, or what people tend to forget really, is that ransomware is still a very sort of nascent criminal business. Ransomware threat actors, they are still trying to figure things out, like what is the best approach. And I think the biggest change that we will see is how is being the access to the network, the access to the data, and in particular, how is the exfiltrated data used and used most efficiently. And we've seen some beginnings of that. Klopp, for example, they like to steal mail databases, especially of the managers within a company, and they will look for dirt within these email databases, things a company may try to hide in order for them to put pressure onto these managers. That is something that is still relatively new. They also tend to investigate the business relationships, like the existing business relationships of the companies that they manage to infiltrate, because that allows them to create much more convincing spear phishing attacks. If
Sure.
there's an existing relationship between a company and their MSP, for example, then the MSP probably expects like emails, maybe file attachments. So there's a much bigger likelihood that they will open these attachments, which may give an attacker like a window into this other company.
Into the network.
Klopp, into the network, right? And with Klopp in particular, we often see like clusters of victims who have existing relationships, like existing business relationships, because that is exactly what they are doing. I also see that there will be a lot more insider trading going on. thing, short selling of stock right before the ransomware threat actor is going to pull the trigger on the ransomware deployment, because they know this. They know in advance, right? Then the stock prices are going to plummet the moment the breach becomes public.
Interesting. I haven't thought about that. But you mentioned Tesla, for instance. They're a high dollar, high value stock. And, I really hadn't thought about that. If Tesla were to get ransomed, that would make their stock just plummet. So what you're saying is the cyber criminals probably have the stock and they will bail out prior to executing the ransomware. And then once that hits, they wait for the stock to drop and then buy it or buy it again. What's your take on that?
Essentially short selling, right? They loan a couple of shares, sell it right before the attack for this higher price. Mm-hmm. Then once it plummets, they buy new shares and trade them back to whoever lent them those shares in the first place. It's like a common practice, really, when it comes to stock exchanges. Even though, and I have to say, I'm like not a stock expert. That is my understanding of how short selling works, right? But that is like the general idea. Like when it comes to stock trading, you can essentially bet against the company. You can bet and profit off a company, a company's value dropping instead of it just increasing, right? And that is one aspect that we haven't seen being explored by a lot of ransomware threat actors yet. But I do have like a suspicion that that is actually something that will happen more in the future and that we will see more commonly in the future.
Wow. Well, it's definitely changing. It's evolving like anything. So, what is would you consider backups to be the best defense against ransomware right now? Or what would you say is the best defense if it's not backups?
It certainly is backups.
Okay.
I would 100% say so. Proper backups and a solid playbook. What do you need to do in order to restore those backups in case of like a ransomware incident? Those are probably the most effective weapons you have as a company to defend against ransomware attacks, right? That means make sure you have like a solid restoration strategy, like figure out which of your systems are critical and need to be restored first, figure out which duties you have as a company to meet any sort of regulatory needs, right? Which entity do I have to contact to report this breach, for example? And also try and figure out your communication strategy way ahead of time. Because trust me, if you don't do your homework now, and instead try to sort of wing it when the worst case happens and all your systems are encrypted, that is the worst time possible trying to figure things out.
You probably can't think. You can't think clearly.
You really can't. I mean, imagine like management is breathing down your neck because the company is hemorrhaging money, right? Support is breathing down your neck because they are being pummeled by customers asking, when is stuff going to work again, right? And there's just such immense amount of stress in that particular situation that really try to be prepared. And what is most important, test your backups on a regular basis. Make sure you can actually restore them. It's honestly quite shocking how many times we are dealing with companies who come to us for help, and they do have backups, but they only did backups as like, to check off like a checkbox on a list, right? They never actually tried to restore it. And now they suddenly realize, oh, wait, we have like 20 petabytes of backups. Just transferring those back into our company network, that's going to take us months.
Right.
Stuff like that, right? Try to figure these things out first. And the best way to do it is to actually do test runs. Do a test run of your backup. Like, imagine everything's gone. Which service do I need to restore first? Like, what are the dependencies like? come up with like a priority. In a lot of cases, it turns out you don't have to back up or restore everything. A lot of the endpoints in particular, yeah, you just reinstall them from the image. The data on there wasn't that necessary in the first place because people worked on like the central file share anyway, right?
Sure.
Things like that. And yeah, update and verify and just do like table exercises of your playbook on a regular on a regular basis. We actually recommend going over your documentation about what to do when ransomware hits, probably like once every 3 months.
Wow. That's something we all should be doing, because one day, we probably all are going to be facing the cold truth about that. So no, excellent advice too. And should those backups be air gapped in your opinion? Should they be isolated from the local LAN?
That is an absolute necessity, yes. Otherwise, you can fully expect, since I mentioned before, most ransomware attacks that are hitting companies, they are human operated. The first thing they will do is try to figure out what security software are you using, what backup software are you using, where are those backups stored? Can I get to the backups somehow to make them unusable? Can I either encrypt them? Can I delete them? And it goes to the point where in many cases, at the time the ransomware is being delivered to your network, which is usually the very, very end of the attack, right? Before that, you often have like days, sometimes even weeks, where the attackers kind of scoped out your network and figured out exactly how can they get past your defenses, how can they disable your security software, for example.
Sure.
Even to the point where these attackers figure out the login credentials to your dashboards. So they just go in there and whitelist their ransomware payload before deploying it, so your antivirus doesn't even detect it. To be quite honest with you, most security solutions and like most antiviruses, they have no problem at all detecting ransomware in like an isolated way, right? If they only had to deal with the ransomware, that would be totally fine. I mean, even antiviruses that are blind or almost blind have no trouble detecting like Ryuk or detecting REvil or detecting any of these other large ransomware families. The problem is that at the time this ransomware payload hits your network, they already control all of these aspects in your company network, and they simply turn your antivirus off.
Ah, that makes sense.
So
they disable its ability to detect the ransomware.
Essentially, yeah, essentially.
Wow. So, you don't see a whole lot about Apple's getting hit, Apple versus Windows, Macintosh. Do you see any Apples getting ransomed?
Ransomware for Apple certainly exists.
Okay.
There are no real mainstream ransomware families that are being used by like larger threat actors. But yeah, there's like no reason why there couldn't be ransomware for Macs, right? The thing is with ransomware, people also always say, oh yeah, why isn't there like Linux ransomware? There actually is a lot of Linux ransomware out there. Pretty much all large ransomware families, they have a Linux version. Okay. They don't deploy it on Linux servers though. Where they deploy it to ESXi servers. Like those large virtualization servers, right, that are running like all those VMs. And yeah, they're just encrypting the virtual machines. They don't like kind of try to break into every single VM and encrypt all the files in there. No, they just jump out of those VMs. They often use like hypervisor escape exploits, especially if you are using like an older version of ESXi. There are quite a few ready-to-use hypervisor escapes available for all the versions. And yeah, they will just encrypt the entire VMs instead of the servers. So all ransomware needs really is read and write access to files that are important to you, and that's it. Because I mean, everything else, encryption algorithms, you can just implement those yourself. You don't rely on any inherent like property of the operating system in order for ransomware to work. So as long as your Mac users, they can read and write the data that is important to you, you can create ransomware families. And we have seen a lot of ransomware families nowadays being implemented in programming languages like Go, who quite literally, you just tell it, oh yeah, I want an executable for Linux, Mac OS, and for Windows, and it will just spit them out for you. You can run it. It's the same code. It just runs on all platforms and all these like certain specifics, like the Go runtime engine or like the Go runtime will handle for you.
So I heard you mention earlier all ransomware needs to deploy is basically read-write access to the disk. So what do you feel about how do you feel about zero trust technology and implementation by IT service professionals or in an enterprise environment? What do you think about zero trust in an effort to combat ransomware?
It's certainly a step in the right direction, but personally, I see zero trust more as a mitigation for data exfiltration, not necessarily to curb ransomware itself. Because gotcha. Documents and data that your employees can't edit, can't change, is generally not very useful for them. Which means most of your employees, if they need to work with data, they will be able to write it. So if the user has the ability to write the data, so has the ransomware, right? So unless we are talking about like a hypothetical scenario where your users only need to read the data, but never write it, never make a single change, never like book an additional appointment, never enter like an additional sale, stuff like that, then yeah, zero trust can mitigate ransomware. But in all other scenarios, and I would argue that these other scenarios are the vast majority of scenarios, it's not going to help ransomware much. However, it is incredibly useful to stop data exfiltration, which a lot of ransomware gangs nowadays also engage in.
Well, we talked an awful lot about ransomware and the different families and strains. Is there one ransomware in particular that stands out as you as, just one of the most difficult strains or strands that you've ever worked with?
There are a couple actually, but like difficulty and complexity, they are like two different kinds in my mind. There is difficult and complex because of technical sophistication, but there can also be difficulty and complexity because of technical ineptitude, because they didn't know what they were doing, and now suddenly you have to somehow deal with all that chaos that they sort of created, right? I think Doppel Payment, Wasted Locker, they use a pretty interesting and pretty sophisticated obfuscation. And obfuscation in this particular case means, well, an obfuscator, when it comes to malware, is essentially a tool that takes like a malware payload, a malware binary, and then applies a lot of transformations to it, like encryption, to essentially obfuscate what this file actually is, so it becomes undetected by antivirus programs, right? At least the signature-based detections, right? Now, also, like, the obfuscation makes it a lot more difficult for someone like me to get to the actual ransomware code in order to figure out what exactly it is they are doing to the files in order to encrypt them. So they use a very sophisticated obfuscator, which is quite interesting. Now, our evil is complex due to how sophisticated their encryption scheme is. I already mentioned they have like this fallback mechanism. They where they can decrypt files that were encrypted by a rogue affiliate who misuses their ransomware or like violates the rule. And the way they do this is that they have like complete PKI. It's called like a public key infrastructure that allows them to kind of overrule, which is a very, very neat and sort of clean design, right? But on the other hand, you also have like ransomware families like Hive, who are like simply complex due to the authors having absolutely no idea what they are doing, really. So encryption with Hive involves like 100 different RSA keys of like various sizes from 1024 bits to like 5120 bits. It involves like a 10 megabyte buffer that they use as like some sort of a one-time pad, really, and a completely custom and self-invented stream cipher as an encryption algorithm, and it's just such a mess. And just to give you like an idea, their decryptor is about 100 times slower than our implementation of their mess. So that is like complicated and complex, not because they are like really good at what they are doing. It's because the exact opposite.
So their sloppy code, you have to go in and fix their code as well as you're going through it. And it's multiple layers. Wow. Well, no, that makes total sense. So any advice, or actually, you know, let me ask you this. Is there a common mistake that a lot of people make, a lot of victims make as they're undergoing a ransomware attack at the current moment? What's like the number one mistake you see made all the time?
Honestly, a lack of transparency. And this applies both to transparency with your customers, but also this hesitancy to get law enforcement involved. Now, here's the thing, right? We have encountered so many cases where we were able to de-anonymize the Tor server, for example, that is being used by ransomware or ransomware threat actors, so that they could sort of, so that those servers could be seized and we would get access to the keys and could help every single victim out there. But we can't get them seized because there's not a single victim who reported the crime. And without a victim, law enforcement agencies can't engage, at least not legally, right? The other thing is your customers, they will know that you got hit by ransomware because, let's be honest, it's blatantly obvious. Everything shuts down at once. And if you try to kind of weasel your way out of it, trying to lie to your customers, oh yeah, it's just like a technical difficulty, right? They will hold that against you because your customers generally aren't dumb, right?
Yep. And they have their trust in you. And
exactly.
That trust took forever to build.
It takes, honestly, when you look at large ransomware cases, take TravelX, for example. They tried to deny that there was ransomware, even though it was like blatantly obvious to everyone. And they got pummeled for it. And honestly, rightfully so. Just be honest about it. Compare that to like the response of Kaseya, for example, who were very open about everything. They give you like regular updates about what is going on, what is the current step, what is the current process. And as a result, even though Kaseya took like a major hit, they are still doing relatively fine. Another positive example is like Norsk Hydro. They got hit by Ryuk a couple of years ago. And yes, they had to stop like the entire, I think the entire aluminum production, for example, for a while, and everything was at a standstill. But they are doing fine now. Because they were very open about what happened. They communicated clearly with their customers. They didn't try to hide anything. They worked together with law enforcement in order to get this reported properly. And now they are doing just fine. And one last thing that is also often being ignored is like this belief, oh yeah, I have a decryptor. I will just decrypt my data and then I just keep using all my compromised IT infrastructure because I decrypted it, right? That is honestly a mistake. That's like pure sloppiness. There are like a lot of statistics out there that if you got hit by a ransomware once, you are statistically more likely to have like another breach later on. And that is precisely because of this. If your infrastructure got compromised, if you got a ransomware breach, it means you will have to rebuild your network. Even if you have a decryptor, even if you pay the ransom, what you need to do is rebuild your network, decrypt your data in your old network, right? That is now completely off limit, rebuild an entire new network. We call it green network, really. We distinguish green network, which is like the new network, and red network is the one that was compromised. Copy over the data and only the data. No executable files, nothing really, no settings even, just the data. Copy it over and then stop using your old environment entirely and switch over to the new one. That is the only way how you can guarantee you will not get hit again. If someone tries to tell you otherwise, then they are most likely lying to you. Because even with a very detailed digital forensic analysis and of the incident afterwards, you can never be sure that there isn't a backdoor left behind. A lot of ransomware threat actor, they create like a new account, right? They install like PC Anywhere in an obscure directory somewhere that they could use to access your system again, stuff like that. And it's a lot easier to just reinstall everything than it is trying to make sure all these backdoors aren't there, because it's incredibly difficult to prove a negative, right? It's impossible even to prove a negative because you can never be sure. So just rebuild the network. Don't be lazy. At the very least, rebuild the network if you don't want to become part of the next ransomware statistics a couple of months down the line.
Well, is there ever a time, in your opinion, when a company or a ransomware victim, should negotiate and pay a ransom? What's your thoughts on that?
Honestly, I have a lot of empathy for victims, right? And I know there are like a lot of people out there who are like hardliners. Oh, you should never pay a ransom because it just encourages more victims. And if nobody paid, then we wouldn't have this problem in the first place. And yes, I mean, when you look at this topic like purely objectively, then yeah, you are right. If nobody would pay, then this problem wouldn't exist. On the other hand, we are dealing with a lot of actual lives and livelihoods here. So whenever lives or livelihoods depend on it, I think, yeah, go for it. Talk to these ransomware threat actors. There are like, especially lately, there are like a lot of demands over outlawing ransomware payments. And I think these demands, while well-intended, they often come from people who never actually were the victim of a ransomware breach in the first place. And in a lot of ways, they are like very short-sighted, right? Because think about it, if you outlaw ransomware payments, essentially what you're doing is you punish a victim twice. Because not only did you completely bring down whatever the business is of the victim, you then also actively prevent them from restoring it in the first place. Fines that would be associated with ransom payments, they would just become part of the cost versus benefit analysis. So it would just be like another position on, oh yeah, this is how much money we lost, really. So what would you do about that? Yeah. Do you want to give people prison crime or like, yeah, jail sentences, right? Do you really want to fine someone for wanting to save their company from certain death, for example, who was like protecting the livelihoods of like all their employees, potentially like hundreds, if not thousands of families, really? Do you really want to imprison them, right? Even though it was never their fault, they got hit in the first place. I don't think that's right, to be completely honest with you. And all you would achieve really is forcing ransomware incidents. Yeah, you would just force them to go even further underground. There will be even less reporting. There will be even less transparency, which is quite frankly the polar opposite of what we need in order to get a handle on this situation. We need more reporting. We need more transparency. And like all these people who are demanding outlawing Bitcoin or outlawing ransom payments and like all these other things, it's not going to work. Crime, and especially crime when it comes to ransom, has existed for a very, very long time. And it will continue to exist because guess what? These threat actors, they are already breaching laws, right? They don't care if they breach like one more law. It's so short-sighted, and it's honestly always a little bit disheartening to see people arguing for stuff like that, since they all kind of seem to forget that we are talking about like livelihoods here.
Well, before we wrap it up, you know, I wanted to ask you any semblance with your polar bear. I heard you like polar bears. Is that symbolic to ransomware in any way?
It isn't. No. It's actually like a sort of a funny story. So the polar bear thing, it kind of started out as an inside joke. So a couple of years ago, several of the Bleeping Computer volunteers, like the forum volunteers who help victims, and we used to hang out on IRC, which is essentially like an online text chat, right? For those who don't know what IRC is. And there I met Sarah. Her name, she goes by the handle Toffee or like Polar Toffee on Twitter, for example. And Sarah is pretty much like my best friend, and at this point, like my right-hand woman when it comes to ransomware research. And she posted like a picture of herself wearing a polar bear onesie.
Okay.
So everyone who was like hanging out in that IRC channel, they started calling her like the little polar bear or like the baby polar bear, right? And since we were hanging out so much, like soon people started calling me that I'm like the big polar bear, since when she's the little polar bear, then I must be the big polar bear, right? So that's why, and yeah, that's why when we helped an artist with a ransomware case, like his entire life's work, his entire portfolio was encrypted, and we were able to help him. And he was like, so in general, we didn't take money back then from anyone who we helped. But he suggested, hey, maybe if you don't want to take my money, maybe I can draw you a couple of avatars. So we took him up on that offer because it seemed fair. I mean, essentially, we are trading our skills in exchange for his, right? So we asked him to draw us in polar bear onesies, like both of us. And that's why we both have like this avatar on Twitter and like in other places of us wearing polar bear onesies. And
it just kind of stuck.
Yeah, and that is essentially how this whole polar bear thing worked and came to be, really. But no, it doesn't have anything to do with a particular ransomware or anything.
Well, you know, and I want to be conscious of your time. I know we're wrapping up here on the hour, but I wanted to ask you one more topic to talk about. I was reading in my research, so I was reading about that you're a member of an exclusive volunteer community of like 3 people, invitation only kind of thing with ransomware. Can you talk about that?
It's not like 3 people. There are like a couple of more. I think it's like 8. But yeah, you're probably talking about the ransomware hunting team.
I think so.
Which is essentially like a private invite-only community that really originated in the Bleeping Computer forum and on Twitter of like-minded ransomware researchers. We all spend our free time really, or dedicate our free time really, to the cause, so to say. Meaning we are looking for new ransomware families. We are trying to dissect them, trying to find flaws, trying to de-anonymize infrastructure so it can be seized by law enforcement, and a whole lot of other things, really. So it's a very small but very active and if I may say so, and like pat my own back, really, right? Very impactful when it comes to the global fight against ransomware.
That's excellent.
So, yeah.
Well, we got our first question. We're at the
Sure.
end, but it's really not a question. Well, let me see. And it just disappeared on me. Well, I think Bobby Rose asked a question, basically just said that he thought that, basically when it comes to ransomware, that we shouldn't spend our efforts on trying to come up with, reasons to stop ransomware. Basically, the answer already exists, is valid backup. So, well,
Yeah.
what do you feel about that? Same?
Oh, 100%. And quite honestly, like to everyone listening or watching right now, right? Please, if you don't have a ransomware incident playbook yet, call up your IT team right after this webinar or like this podcast, right? Schedule a meeting to work one out. Like there are a lot of templates available. There's one template from the Scottish government, for example, that you can base your own playbook on, which would be my suggestion, really. Also, if your last test run of your backup restore procedures is like further away than like, let's say 3 months, please get your one right after this this webinar and podcast. There's this concept. Are you familiar with the concept of Schrödinger's cat?
No, I'm not.
Essentially, it's like a thought experiment that involves like a poisonous vial within the box, and you have no way, like this poisonous vial, it will like open up and release the poison anytime, but you can't know when. And you put both the poisonous vial and a cat into that box, so you can't look into the cat. And like for the time where until you actually open the box and look at it, the cat exists in like a theoretical state of both being alive and dead at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Of course, you can't know. And this sort of principle can also be applied to backups. And we call it Schrödinger's backups, really. And essentially, it means like the condition of your backup really is unknown until you try to actually restore it, because you can't know whether or not it will work or not, right?
That's very true.
So really test your backups. It's so important. And if you don't have a playbook yet for your company, please create one.
Well, very good. So, I'm not sure. I was also going to ask you if you had any words of wisdom for our audience, but it seems like you may have just shared it.
Yeah, I think so. That's honestly the most important one. And as I said before, if you ever become the victim of like a ransomware attack, please report it to the authorities. Like there quite literally nothing hurts more than us finding the perpetrators of the attack, but nobody can do anything about it because there's no victim willing to come forward.
Right. Yeah. No victim, no crime. Right.
Exactly.
So it's like
you simply will not get a warrant in order to seize the server without a victim, without a proper investigation. And police or law enforcement agencies in a lot of countries, they are simply not allowed to just create an investigation out of thin air. They need victims who come forward to file a report, and then they can start an investigation, get warrants, and all this other stuff that's like way above my head, since I'm not working in legal or like law enforcement in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, it's absolutely important that please do report ransomware incidents if you ever encounter one.
Very good. Well, Fabian, if you don't have anything else, I will probably wrap it up with you. I can't thank you enough for your time, and I know you're very your time is very in demand right now. So we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with our community.
Yeah, you are very, very welcome. And if there are like no other questions, I still have like some time. If you're willing to go a little bit over time, I don't mind.
Absolutely. I have plenty of time. I just wanted to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, no, it's completely fine. I made sure to kind of black out my schedule a little bit just for this.
Well, tell us something interesting that you've learned about ransomware then.
Something interesting.
Maybe that people wouldn't think about.
An interesting case, or
Just something that most people wouldn't normally think about when it comes to ransomware, maybe that you found in decrypting a lot of it or anything like that.
Honestly, it kind of always surprises me how many people create ransomware without reading like a single documentation or a single document about best practices. There are certain errors that we have seen at this point for like 10 years who have been talked about in blogs and in pretty much every single what should you never do if you ever have to implement encryption or decryption in an application kind of guidelines, right? Who people still do all the time. And it's completely baffling. Another thing is like how sometimes you can actually get the better of a lot of ransomware threat actors just by being calm and breaking the ransomware. There are like so many examples where ransomware threat actors got seriously upset and made changes to their ransomware just to put like an insult, an insult targeted towards me in their ransomware. And by doing so, they actually made decrypting of their ransomware a whole lot easier because they put the insult into memory that previously was uninitialized, meaning we could not know what was in there. But now we knew what was in there because, it now said, I don't know, Fabian Wosar is, and then a couple of like expletives, right? Which is always very, very kind of funny and fascinating to me.
So, a lot of people, I will touch on another subject too that
Sure.
I failed to ask you. A lot of people have mentioned with these free tools that, it shouldn't be public information. It should be available on kind of like a underground level because is just like you reverse engineer the ransomware itself. The threat actors, the cyber criminals, can go in and reverse engineer. It's like a reverse engineer, and then they found out, okay, well they cracked the code because we left this door open, so we'll just shut the door and we'll redeploy our ransomware again and make it that much harder. Do you feel like it's a cops and robbers game all the time like that?
It is, yes. And I think you actually asked that question to our sales staff the last time they were on here.
Yeah.
And demonstrated like our Mgsoft platform, right? So yeah, here's the deal essentially. We release, so our policy for releasing public decryption tools is essentially we release public decryption tools either if we obtained a master key or like a public key dump, like in the Avedon case, where it's obvious how we are decrypting the data, where we are not exploiting any sort of flaw or vulnerability, really. There really isn't anything to reverse engineer in the first place. That is a case where we will release a decryption tool publicly. And we will also release a decryption tool publicly if we are dealing with a ransomware threat actor that has such a low skill level or ability level that is like so unsophisticated that first of all, there aren't a lot of victims in the first place, but also where we can be somewhat sure that they don't have the technical skill that is required in order to reverse engineer our tool in the first place.
That makes sense.
Which in most cases means what it really means is, does this ransomware target home users? If so, we will probably release the decryption tool publicly because those are usually like lone wolf threat actors who are very low skilled, who don't have like a huge team that are like highly capable when it comes to reverse engineering in the first place. For a ransomware family like DarkSide, for example, or Ryuk, or Zeppelin even, like all these sort of ransomware groups where we know those are technically sophisticated threat actors, we would never release a decryption tool for, except if there's like a master key, for example, or they quite literally just handed us their key database, so there's nothing to hide in the first place, right? So that is essentially how we the sort of this thing, the sort of rules that we use in order to decide whether or not we make a decryption tool public or not. If we decide not to make a decryption tool public, what we are doing is we look in the usual places like tech support communities, like Bleeping Computer, for example. We look there for victims to show up. And if they do, we will reach out to them in private, tell them, hey, listen, we do have a fix for this.
That's awesome.
First of all, but before we can hand it out, because I know there are cases where some companies released tools for ransomware families, arguing, oh yeah, keeping these tools secret is never going to work, because then the threat actor will just kind of pose as a victim and get the tool that way. I mean, yeah, that would be a threat if you would pretty much hand over the tool to anybody who shows up. But you know what you can do? You can actually verify that these people you are talking to are actual people, and that they are who they talk to, who they claim they are. And it turns out, if you are dealing with like a legitimate company who is being hit by ransomware, they have no issue at all like handing over details that you can verify in company registers about their company. They also don't mind like sending over an ID of the person who are talking to, that you can quite literally just verify and make sure, yes, this is like a legitimate victim and not just a threat actor posing as a victim. Of course, that means that you do actually need to spend resources, because it takes time verifying the identity of a person, right? So if really your primary motivation for releasing a public decryptor is just getting like a short marketing blast, then spending resources in then obviously you don't want to spend like extra money on verifying the identity of people who are reaching out to you, because yeah, you just want to get a decryption tool out, get a quick media blast, and yeah, then you just live with the fact that you just helped the threat actor fixing the flaw, because it's like blatantly obvious. And they do have the technical capabilities of just reverse engineering your tool and figuring out what exactly it is that you are abusing.
Well, no, that I think that's a very sweet spot that you put yourself in. It's a very happy medium to me. If you frequent those sites and you look those tech communities and sites, and you look for people that you could reach out to privately and help, that's kind of the best of both worlds, if you ask me. So that's really, really great.
And we do have like a network of like incident response companies that we are often working with, where we do communicate new capabilities when it comes to ransomware decryption too, on like a timely basis. And we also do offer like a free evaluation of every single ransomware case you encounter. So if you ever encounter like a ransomware case, one of your clients gets ransomed, for example, you can simply reach out to us. We will most likely ask you for like the ransomware payload and some encrypted files and the ransom note in order for us to do our technical analysis of whether or not we can help. And we do that entirely for free as well. So there really is no reason not to reach out to us for help if you ever have to deal with a ransomware incident.
Well, how can someone get in touch with you? What's the best way if they're currently undergoing a ransomware attack and they want to reach out to take advantage of that free service? What's the best way to get in touch?
You can simply go to our homepage, and under services, let me check just to make sure.
So it's mgsoft.com, right?
Yes, mgsoft.com. You can just go there.
Okay.
And it's under tools, the customized ransomware recovery. There you will find a form that you can just fill out in order to reach out to us. It will ask you for like all the information we typically need to evaluate a case. So we have like everything right away, and we will usually get back to you within 24 hours. So yeah,
that's wonderful.
There really is. And as I mentioned before, we offer this particular service for free, because it always hurts me, and it hurts me really it quite literally hurts me whenever I see a case where someone paid a ransom, however small it may have been, even though it was unnecessary. So really, just send over the details about the case and we will look into it and let you know.
Because your team may have, they may pay $1 million or more, and your team already had a decryption tool for it available.
In a lot of cases, yeah.
Wow.
Like the worst case that I have seen is where someone paid 14 million ransom, even though it was unnecessary.
Wow.
Like, just imagine, right? We could have saved them like 14 US dollars.
Do you get reached? Do a lot of the insurance agencies reach out to you when they're in the middle of having to pay a claim?
We do cooperate with some of the cyber insurances, right? But we don't work together with like all of them. Gotcha. So, and in a lot of cases, insurances are kind of hesitant of like getting too many companies involved in like one insurance claim. So really, in a lot of cases, unless you specifically ask or request us, they probably won't offer it to you in the first place. Gotcha. That being said, we do have like a lot of contacts to other incident response companies, companies like Coveware, for example, right? Who deal a lot of, who do a lot of these ransomware negotiations, who see a lot of cases. So if you're going, if you do have to pay a ransom, or if you see yourself confronted with the possibility that you will have to pay a ransom and you go through one of these companies, they will make sure to sort of pull us in and make sure that paying the ransom is like the only way you will get your data back, and make sure not a single penny goes to a threat actor that doesn't necessarily have to go to them.
Gotcha. No, that makes total sense. So kind of like a mediator, so to speak.
Yes. And I mean, it completely makes sense for them as well, right? Bitcoins, getting like millions in Bitcoins is actually quite challenging in the first place. Then your accounting department probably may not like. I mean, for them, it's like a lot easier if you get like an invoice from a registered US company for your bookkeeping purposes, right? Than trying to somehow book this Bitcoin payment that then went to someone, but you don't really know one. So there are like a lot of administrative advantages over going through like a mediation company like Coveware, for example, just from like a business point of view, really.
Well, no, that makes total sense. Well, I've got to ask you, are your cats behaving?
They are, and I'm surprised. Usually whenever I'm doing something like this, my cats show up being like all nosy. Like, who is he talking to? Is he talking to like other cats? Are we being replaced? Is he cuddling other people? No, my cats are fine. They're just sleeping. I do have like 2 cats.
So what are their names?
Yeah. Oh, the names are Emerald and Sapphire.
Okay.
And yes, they are named after the Pokemon games.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Because that is usually the next. Oh, like the Pokemon games, and yeah, exactly like the Pokemon games.
Well, that brings up a great question. When you're not fighting cybercrime, what do you like to do in your spare time to unwind and clear your head mentally of ransomware?
To be honest with you, for the longest time, like fighting ransomware was my hobby. And I kind of put every single minute, like I was awake into it. However, like a couple of years ago, I sort of realized that simply isn't sustainable.
Sure.
So I did come up with like a couple of hobbies. Like I do enjoy playing Final Fantasy 14.
Okay.
Quite a lot. It's like an MMORPG, like a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, and that I spend a lot of time in, like just raiding and clearing dungeons with friends, really. I also do obviously enjoy just playing and spoiling my 2 cats. And I do a lot of volunteer work, like just locally helping people out with their computer problems if they have anything. I do live in like a development that has like their own sort of small social network, like an app where you can talk to your neighbors and stuff like that. So whenever there are like problems or whenever someone needs help with anything that's like IT related. I do enjoy doing that as well.
Well, that kind of makes sense, because if you dive deep into ransomware for so long, I see where going kind of back to your old roots would be, kind of refreshing at times. So,
yeah, exactly.
Helping someone, because their computer won't boot, they just have a failed hard drive. So it's kind of nice to get back to the basics of computer repair.
Yeah, really. That's actually the case. Also, like one of my neighbors, they actually wanted to build their first own computer, like a complete custom build, but they sort of felt nervous about like building their first system from scratch on their own. So I thought, no, it's not an issue at all. You can just come over with all the parts and we can build it together. And it was like quite a lot of fun. So
that's awesome. Bring a bottle of wine and let's put it together.
Well, I don't really enjoy alcohol. So even though I'm German, which quite frankly is like almost blasphemy in German. But do you mean you don't drink beer? No, I don't drink beer. I find beer to be tasting disgusting. Even German beer, which apparently, as I have been told, is like one of the best beers in the world, right? But no, I don't really enjoy alcohol that much.
Well, that is great. I drink a little bit, but I don't consider myself a drinker either. So, but every once in a while, I do like to have a bottle of wine or a glass of wine. Maybe
I don't really like wine. What I do enjoy sometimes are like cocktails, and I go for like the fruitiest and girliest cocktails out there, and I don't really care. I mean, you drink like your beer, and which I find disgusting. I stick to my fruity cocktails. I mean,
there you go.
You do you, really. I do. Yep. I do me.
There you go. Well, nobody knows you like yourself, so absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
But well, Mr. Fabian, I am fresh out of questions. If you don't,
you are.
Yeah. Anything you want to ask me?
No, not really, to be honest.
Good deal.
Yeah. It has been really nice talking to you.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. I
had a lot of fun.
We'll have to definitely get together and do this again sometime.
Oh yeah, maybe next time we can talk about like a different topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
That sounds great. Well, Fabian, thank you again for your time. It's been a pleasure.
No problem at all.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.